Chaos erupts in the US Army after a covert threat against Jungkook and Taehyung surfaces, revealing secrets that could shake global security. There's a kill order on both of them. Jungkook and Taehyung are targets. The voice crackled through the encrypted comms, and in that moment, Captain Elizabeth Rowe's heart dropped into her stomach. Her fingers clenched the edge of the war table as the dimly lit briefing room at Fort Bragg fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a blade. The room was filled with high-ranking officers, each processing the magnitude of what had just been said. Seconds later, alarms began to blare across the base. Red strobes flashed violently as the compound shifted into lockdown. Outside, helicopters thundered into the night sky. Inside, intelligence analysts scrambled through satellite footage and intercepted transmissions. And at the center of it all, two civilians halfway across the world, unaware they had become pawns in a game far more dangerous than fame or fandom. 3 days earlier, in the velvet-draped backroom of an upscale Manhattan hotel, Jungkook had felt the first whisper of unease. It was the way the security guard stiffened when a silver case was passed between hands, the way Taehyung's smile faltered mid-laugh during a toast, the way silence had crept in between their conversations in recent weeks, each of them pretending not to notice how their lives had subtly shifted from glamorous to guarded. Backstage, amid the glow of vanity lights and the muffled hum of fans outside, Taehyung had pulled Jungkook aside. His voice was low. "Do you ever feel like we're being watched?" Jungkook didn't answer immediately. His eyes lingered on the camera mounted high in the corner. "Every second," he replied. Neither of them knew that miles away, in a windowless building deep in Virginia, a facial recognition algorithm flagged Jungkook's image at JFK International Airport and triggered a silent alert to a Black Ops task force. By the time they landed in Los Angeles, 3 different intelligence agencies had red-flagged a chatter string from the dark web referencing Project Black Viper. Among the code and ciphers, 2 names were repeated with alarming frequency: John Jungkook, Kim Taehyung. What made them targets wasn't just their fame. It was what they had accidentally seen in Dubai, a flash drive, a photograph, and a voice they recognized in a place it never should have been. That night, a drone surveillance feed went dark for precisely 47 seconds. In that time, Jungkook had picked up a dropped phone near a rooftop bar. On it, a single open file, encrypted, time-stamped, and labeled Viridian Gate Now. Seated across from each other in the back of a black SUV racing down a rain-slicked LA freeway, Jungkook and Taehyung were finally starting to understand the depth of the danger. The usual banter between them was gone. In its place was a silence that vibrated with adrenaline and unspoken fear. The driver didn't speak. They didn't even know who had sent him, only that he'd shown them a photo of Taehyung's sister, taken that morning, as proof that whoever was behind this knew everything. Every vulnerability. Every person they loved. Jungkook clenched his fists. He'd faced paparazzi, scandals, even stalkers, but this was something else. This was orchestrated, military, precise. In a secret meeting room at the Pentagon, the defense secretary slammed a folder onto the table. "Why the hell is a South Korean pop idol showing up in intercepted intel from paramilitary groups in Eastern Europe?" No one had an answer, because no one yet knew that Jungkook and Taehyung had been used unwittingly as couriers in an international intelligence operation gone rogue. And now, the same rogue element wanted them silenced permanently. Meanwhile, Jungkook stared out the tinted window, raindrops racing down like tears on glass. His mind flashed to the day his father, a former intelligence analyst, died in what was called a car accident. He'd always thought there was more to the story. Maybe this was the key. Taehyung turned to him, voice quiet. "What do we do now?" Jungkook's jaw tensed. "We stop running." Behind them, a black sedan without plates made a sudden swerve across lanes. Ahead, the SUV driver's hand went to the concealed pistol by his seat. The air inside the vehicle grew electric. And in that instant, beneath the glare of a red light and the screaming sirens in the distance, Jungkook knew the game had changed. They were no longer just artists. They were witnesses, and somebody wanted them erased. The black SUV swerved violently as the unmarked sedan lunged closer from behind. Tires screeched against the wet asphalt, echoing through the skeletal structures of an unfinished overpass. Inside, Jungkook's heart pounded like a war drum. He reached out instinctively, arm bracing across Taehyung's chest as their vehicle jerked hard to the right, narrowly avoiding a collision with a concrete divider. The driver's voice was clipped and urgent. "We're boxed in." A third vehicle had emerged from the shadows of a nearby alley, accelerating with precision toward the intersection they were approaching. Taehyung's eyes darted toward the glove compartment, but the driver shook his head. Not there. Center console. Red latch. Jungkook popped it open without hesitation. Nestled inside was a compact handgun, 2 loaded magazines, and a folded piece of paper stained with fingerprints. He grabbed the weapon, his hand trembling not from fear but from memory. The last time he'd held a gun, it was in a simulation range his father had snuck him into as a teenager. The rules of fame didn't apply there. There was no screaming audience, no flashing lights, only silence and steel and instinct. Taehyung, ever composed even in chaos, was scanning the surroundings with calculating eyes. His artist's mind was always visualizing angles, symmetry, patterns, and right now, it saw a trap closing in. They're not trying to kill us. Not yet. They want us alive. Jungkook caught his gaze. That's worse. The SUV lurched as the driver took a sudden exit down a narrow side street, barely wide enough for 2 lanes. Steam rose from manholes like ghosts, swallowing their vehicle in a haze of urban twilight. Behind them, the pursuit didn't falter. Engines howled, tail lights blurred. Jungkook could feel their intentions in the air, merciless and cold. A bullet shattered the back windshield, shards exploding like ice across their shoulders. Taehyung ducked instinctively, his breath catching as another shot cracked against the metal frame. Jungkook pivoted, weapon raised, eyes narrowing against the whiplash of adrenaline and fear. He returned fire a single shot, sharp and clean before the driver screamed over his shoulder. "Hold on." The SUV spun into a sudden left, crashing through a rusted gate and into an abandoned textile warehouse. Concrete dust exploded around them as the vehicle skidded to a halt inside the dark, cavernous space. The driver slammed the door open and barked, "Go! There's a back stairwell to the roof! Move!" Taehyung didn't question it. He was already running, boots slapping against cracked concrete. Jungkook close behind. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, pursuers moving in tight formation. Professional, methodical. These weren't amateurs. These weren't obsessive fans or paparazzi gone rogue. These were trained operatives, killers. The stairwell was narrow and reeked of mildew. Their footsteps pounded upward as dust and age flaked off the walls. Jungkook could hear his own breathing now, ragged and sharp, his hand gripping the gun with white-knuckled resolve. They burst onto the rooftop, greeted by the city's cold breath and a skyline smeared with red and gold. The sun was bleeding into the horizon. Below them, the vehicles regrouped, figures spilled out in tactical gear, fanning out like wolves. Jungkook turned to Taehyung. This was planned. They knew we'd be here. "I know," Taehyung replied grimly, pulling something from inside his coat, a data chip, no bigger than a thumbnail. "And this is why," Jungkook stared. "That's the file. From Dubai." Taehyung nodded, voice low. "The one we weren't supposed to see." Across the rooftop, the door burst open. Their driver stumbled through, bleeding from the shoulder, his voice hoarse. "They're jamming signals. You won't be able to call anyone." Jungkook's gaze darted across the rooftop. A broken antenna, a rusted ventilation shaft, a single cable stretching across to an adjacent building. He pointed. "We can jump. That's a 3-story fall if we miss," Taehyung muttered. "We won't." They ran. Bullets ricocheted off concrete behind them. As Jungkook leapt, time slowed. He could feel the tension in his muscles, the pull of gravity, the knife-edge balance between life and death. He landed hard, knees buckling, pain flashing up his legs, but he didn't stop. Taehyung followed, hitting the gravel with a grunt. He rolled, pushed up, and they kept moving. Behind them, the rooftop exploded in gunfire. The driver never made it across. Down fire escapes, through alleyways and into the underbelly of the city, Jungkook and Taehyung vanished into shadows. The city swallowed them whole. Miles away, in a subterranean facility beneath the Pentagon, General Marcus Laird watched the live feed go dark. He turned to the man beside him, a CIA director with eyes like frostbite. "They escaped," Laird said, voice laced with both admiration and fury. The director didn't flinch. "They won't get far. Not with that chip. And if they decrypt it?" The director exhaled slowly, the weight of 1,000 decisions in his silence. "Then every lie we've buried for the last decade will be uncovered. Viridian Gate wasn't just a leak. It was a contingency plan." General Laird looked down at the satellite image. Jungkook and Taehyung, two names in a sea of operatives, dossiers, and cover-ups. "They were never supposed to be involved," he muttered. "None of them ever are," the director replied. Back in LA, Jungkook and Taehyung found temporary refuge in a rundown motel near Koreatown. The neon sign outside flickered like a dying heartbeat. Inside, the room was cramped, the air stale with cigarette smoke and forgotten stories. Taehyung collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. "What did we do, Jungkook? We were just at the wrong place, wrong time," Jungkook finished, sitting on the edge of the bed, wiping blood from his temple. "But we saw something. And now we're the only ones who know." He turned to Taehyung. "We need to find someone who can decrypt that chip. Someone we trust." "There's one person," Taehyung said after a long silence. "My cousin, in Seoul. She works in cybersecurity off the grid. Then we go to Seoul. Not that easy. Flights are flagged. Our faces are everywhere." Jungkook stood. His eyes were cold, resolute. "Then we don't fly. We disappear." The next 24 hours were a blur. They moved like ghosts, changing appearances, ditching electronics, using burner IDs. Jungkook dyed his hair dark and cut it shorter. Taehyung shaved his facial hair and wore tinted lenses. They ditched their signature fashion for anonymity. Baseball caps, hoodies, unbranded clothing, nothing traceable, no patterns, no routine. But the world didn't sleep, and neither did their hunters. Every step they took, a drone hovered. Every streetlight flickered with unseen eyes. Every gesture, every whispered word could be recorded, analyzed, weaponized. And yet, amidst the paranoia and the chaos, something strange grew between them. Clarity. Stripped of their fame, of their bodyguards and glamour, they were just two men again. Jungkook and Taehyung, brothers by bond, not blood. And they were fighting not just for survival, but for truth. Taehyung's hand brushed against his pocket, where the chip still pulsed like a second heartbeat. "What if this changes everything?" Jungkook looked at him, eyes fierce. "Then let it. We've lived in their stories for too long. It's time we told our own." The sky above them rumbled with approaching storm. In a bunker somewhere in Nevada, a new command was issued: capture at all costs. The hunt had only just begun. The rain was falling harder now, soaking the cracked pavement as Jungkook and Taehyung stepped off the edge of the city's rhythm and into the underworld, into the space between systems, where things disappeared and people reappeared with new names. The motel behind them vanished into the shadows, its neon sign swallowed by fog and traffic. They kept their heads down, their movements rehearsed in paranoia. There was no more room for mistakes. They made their way through Koreatown on foot, then took an underground train toward San Pedro. It was far from glamorous. The terminal was cold, rusted with time, its walls plastered with peeling posters and the ghosts of old graffiti. They blended in with a group of late-night dock workers, the scent of engine oil and salt water thick in the air. Beneath Jungkook's hoodie, his fingers closed tightly around the data chip. Every time he touched it, it felt warmer. Maybe that was his imagination. Maybe it wasn't. They met their contact on Dock 14, an old friend of Jungkook's father named Elias. He was ex-intelligence, but these days he passed as a longshoreman, hauling crates and living a quiet life by the water. The sea had a way of softening even the hardest men, but when Elias saw them, he froze. His eyes flicked to the bruises on Jungkook's neck. the limp in Taeyong's step, and he understood everything. You weren't supposed to come to me, he muttered, eyes scanning the horizon. We had no choice, Jungkook replied. Elias took a long drag from his cigarette. How much trouble? Jungkook held up the chip. Enough to start a war. Elias didn't ask what was on it. He just nodded once and turned. Come. They boarded a freighter disguised as a cargo vessel bound for Busan. It would take longer. It would be dangerous, but it was untraceable. Inside the ship, everything smelled of rust and diesel. The engine's hum rattled the walls, but it became a lullaby as the exhaustion set in. Jungkook collapsed onto a cot in the corner of the small cabin, staring at the metal ceiling. Taeyong sat beside him, peeling off his shoes, wincing as the dried blood on his ankle cracked. We should sleep, Jungkook said, eyes already fluttering shut. Taeyong didn't answer. He was watching the porthole, the black ocean outside, churning under a half-moon sky. There was something in the silence, an unease that crawled beneath his skin. Do you think we'll make it? He asked finally, voice barely audible over the engine. Jungkook turned his head. We have to. The journey took 4 days. They passed through the Pacific like phantoms. On the third night, a patrol boat scanned them with floodlights. Elias fed the officers a fabricated manifest in a briefcase thick with currency. The freighter was allowed to pass. When they docked in Busan, it was just after dawn. The city was waking up fishermen unloading nets, market stalls unfurling canvas roofs, the scent of seawater mingling with fish and diesel. Jungkook and Taeyong stepped onto the dock like ghosts rising from a dream. They didn't speak much on the train to Seoul. The countryside blurred past, golden fields giving way to gray towers. The chip stayed tucked inside Taeyong's coat, like a secret only they could hear. The rhythm of the train, the murmur of the other passengers. It was the quietest moment they'd had in days. When they reached the city, they went underground again figuratively and literally. No hotels, no calls. They stayed in a friend's empty apartment in Yongsan, sleeping on the floor, eating instant noodles, keeping the lights off. Taeyong's cousin arrived after midnight. Her name was Seo-yun. She was wiry, intense, with a brain that moved faster than most people could follow. She didn't ask why they were there, until she saw the look in their eyes, haunted, hollowed out. Give me the chip, she said without ceremony. They handed it over. She connected it to a heavily modified laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard. The screen flickered, then went black. Lines of code appeared. Jungkook watched, as symbols he didn't recognize danced across the screen. So-yun frowned. This isn't just encrypted, she murmured. It's layered, military grade. And not just one system, multiple. This was built to never be opened. But can you? Taeyong asked. I'll need time, she said, and silence and power. They gave her all three. While she worked, Jungkook and Taeyong waited in the kitchen. They didn't speak much anymore. Words felt unnecessary. What could they say that hadn't already been carved into their expressions, their scars? Jungkook stared at the steam rising from his cup of tea. I keep thinking about my father. Taehyung looked up. He died chasing something. My whole life I thought it was just his own demons. But now, I think it was this. He was military? Intelligence analyst, Jungkook replied. He told me once, the truth will either save you or destroy you. But you never get to choose which. Taeyong leaned back. Do you think he'd be proud of you? Jungkook smiled faintly. I think he'd be terrified. Hours passed. The sun rose again, light streaking through the blinds like golden blades. Finally, Se-yun called them in. I decrypted part of it, she said. And I wish I hadn't. On the screen were documents, classified operations, surveillance programs, names. But that wasn't what chilled them. It was the photos. Photos of them. At home. In airports. At restaurants. Months. Even years old. Candid. Taken from angles they never saw. They had been watched. Monitored. Used. Jungkook's voice was hoarse. What is Viridian Gate? Seo-yun clicked the file. Up came a logo. A black triangle with a green eye at its center. It's not a program, she said. It's an initiative. Global. Started as counterintelligence. Then it expanded. Surveillance. Influence. Covert manipulation of public figures. Taehyung stepped back. They were using us? Yes, So-yoon said. And when you got too close, when you took that phone in Dubai, they turned you into liabilities. Jungkook's hands were shaking. What do they want now? Erase the leak, she said. Which means erasing you. So-yoon leaned forward. You can't run anymore. You have to expose this. Who would believe us? Taehyung whispered. We're idols, not whistleblowers. Then make them listen, she said. Use the one thing they can't control. Jungkook met her gaze. The fans. The realization hit like lightning. Their voice amplified by millions. If they could package the truth in a way the world could hear it, it wouldn't matter what the agencies tried to bury. But it would also mean the end of everything. No more concerts. No more peace. They would become targets forever. Jungkook turned to Taehyung, and Taehyung nodded. I'd rather die for truth than live under a lie. So they began. Recording, writing, piecing the puzzle into a narrative. Se-yoon created a secure server. They used code words and anonymized footage. Their message was raw, emotional, unfiltered. They detailed what they'd found, what had been done to them, and what they believed was coming. When the video finally uploaded to the Darknet node, there was silence. Then the signal spread, copied, mirrored, posted anonymously. Within hours, it had reached private forums, then message boards, then social media. It went viral. Hashtags exploded. Fans rallied. Journalists sniffed blood in the water. And the agencies? They panicked. Arrest warrants were drafted. Extradition orders signed. A global manhunt was launched, but too late. The truth was out, and it couldn't be undone. The first thing Jungkook noticed the morning after the leak was not the sound of helicopters, nor the chaos that roared through media outlets across continents. It was the silence in the apartment. No humming laptops. No clicks from Seo-yoon's fingers on the keyboard. No sharp voice cutting through the room with an update. Just the sound of distant traffic filtering through the half-open window and the rhythmic tap of raindrops against the cracked window pane. For a moment, he wondered if the storm had passed. But then the television in the corner, muted but flashing with rapid news cycles, confirmed that it hadn't. His face was everywhere. Clips from concerts juxtaposed with blurred surveillance footage. Tabloid headlines merged with redacted documents. A world once obsessed with his voice was now dissecting every movement he had made over the last 3 years. And next to his name, always, was Taehyung's. Taehyung sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the screen with a look that didn't quite register as fear. It was beyond that now. It was the look of someone who had passed the threshold of panic and found something colder on the other side. His phone buzzed beside him, lighting up with dozens of messages, none of which he had the courage to read. Seo-yoon entered the room, her expression unreadable, her eyes red-rimmed from another sleepless night. She tossed a phone onto the coffee table. They're here, Jungkook straightened. How many? At least 4 agencies. US, South Korea, even Japan. Some of them want to help, some want to bury it. Can we tell the difference? No, she said flatly. But someone else reached out. Who? Your father's contact. Jungkook felt his chest tighten. He's still alive. Seo-yoon shook her head. No. But his contingency files were activated, hidden protocols. Whoever was monitoring your father's old encrypted server received the signal when the video went live. They want to meet. Taehyung stood slowly. Where? She hesitated. In person. No digital trail. They suggested an abandoned observatory north of Namsan. Midnight. Tomorrow. It's a trap, Jungkook said immediately. Maybe, Seo-yoon admitted. But if it's not, it could be the key to understanding why your father was murdered, and how deep this thing really goes. Taehyung turned toward the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained gray, swollen with secrets. Then we go. They spent the day preparing, burning all temporary files, switching out devices, planning exit routes. Seo-yoon built them a layered signal jammer, disguised inside a vintage camera bag. They studied blueprints of the observatory from city records, underground access points, roof exits, They agreed on a code word if something went wrong. Lilac. Something soft, unthreatening, easy to remember under pressure. When night fell, the city lights flickered like stars reflected in broken glass. They moved through alleyways and service tunnels beneath the gaze of drones and the invisible eye of facial recognition systems. They were becoming experts in invisibility. The observatory was a husk, a shell of stone and rusted steel perched on the mountain like a forgotten guardian. Its great domed roof was cracked, the telescope dismantled long ago. It had once been a place of wonder, of curiosity and science. Now, it smelled of mildew and abandonment. Jungkook and Taehyung arrived early, hiding in the shadows near the base of the structure. Every creak of wind felt like footsteps, every distant echo a whisper of danger. Midnight struck. A figure emerged through the trees, not tall, but purposeful. Clad in a long, weather-worn coat, hood pulled up against the cold. He stopped 10 feet away from them, hands where they could see. "I knew your father," he said softly, voice carrying despite the distance. "He warned us this would happen." "Who are you?" Jungkook demanded. The man slowly pulled down his hood. His face was weathered, etched with time and secrets, but his eyes were sharp. "My name is Daniel Cho. I was part of the original Viridian Gate oversight team, until we were all dismantled." "Why?" Taehyung asked. "Because we started asking questions," Daniel said, "about why pop icons, cultural leaders, and influencers were suddenly being placed under deeper surveillance. Why intelligence resources were being rerouted to track civilians. It didn't make sense until we saw the pattern." "What pattern?" Jungkook asked. "You," Daniel said, stepping forward. "Not just you, but others like you. Charismatic figures with global reach. You weren't just being watched. You were being positioned, directed, nudged toward moments that could trigger emotional responses from massive audiences." "Psychological influence," Seongyun murmured, stepping out from the trees behind them. Daniel nodded. "Precisely. And when those influences didn't align with political interests, operations were deployed to discredit or neutralize the asset. Viridian Gate wasn't just surveillance, it was manipulation. A soft weapon." Taehyung's voice was cold. "And we were pawns." "Not pawns," Daniel said. "Messengers. You have power no government can replicate. That terrifies them." Jungkook stepped closer. "My father. Did he die because of this?" Daniel looked down. "He died because he believed the truth mattered more than control. And now, you carry that same burden."
Seohyun approached the center of the clearing, voice sharp. "If you want our trust, prove it. Give us access to the internal logs. Show us who signed off on the kill order." Daniel didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat slowly and withdrew a silver flash drive. He tossed it onto the ground at their feet. "That's everything I have. Logs, memos, names." Jungkook bent to pick it up, then looked up again, but Daniel was already backing away. "You have a chance to end it," he said, "but be ready, because once those names go public, no one will ever let you rest again." Then he was gone, swallowed by the trees and the night. Back in the apartment, the flash drive cracked open a world they hadn't imagined. Names of media executives, social media engineers, shadow agents, and even elected officials. Data sets on audience manipulation. Viral algorithms designed not just to promote music, but to trigger unrest, to distract, to polarize. It was horrifying. It was everything. Jungkook stared at the screen. "We release this, we destroy them." Taehyung sat quietly for a long time, "and we destroy ourselves." There was no decision to be made, only a promise to be kept. They released it. Not all at once, but in waves. Documents leaked through independent journalists, whistleblower channels, decentralized networks. It was impossible to contain. The truth became wildfire. Governments denied, corporations deflected, but the people, millions of them, had already seen. Fans around the world mobilized not as a fan base but as a force. They called it the Lilac Movement, a quiet rebellion against control, a demand for transparency. Jungkook and Taehyung vanished. They walked off the stage not with a farewell, but with a roar of defiance that echoed louder than any concert. There were rumors, sightings in the Andes, in Morocco, on remote islands, but nothing confirmed. They were gone. And yet they were everywhere. Their voices, preserved in the files, in the videos, in the hearts of those they had awakened, continued to speak. Some say they live in exile. Others believe they died protecting the final truth. But those who listened closely, those who truly understood what they had sacrificed, knew they had simply become something greater than idols. They had become legends. They moved through the world like echoes, no longer names but symbols, not merely artists but survivors of a truth that scorched everything it touched. Jungkook and Taehyung had disappeared not out of fear, but to allow the truth to breathe without their shadows over it. The files they leaked continued to ripple outward, a digital detonation that reverberated through the corridors of power. The flash drive Daniel had given them was just the beginning. Seo-yeon had found layers in the data no one had seen, subnetworks of control, unregistered AI modules feeding curated trends into public forums, manufactured outrage campaigns deployed with surgical precision. The revelation wasn't simply that their lives had been manipulated. It was that the emotions of millions had been weaponized, love and loyalty twisted into levers of global control. The fanbase they once believed to be spontaneous and organic had been subtly steered to serve agendas they would never understand. And the most painful truth, every intimate moment, every raw lyric, every tear shed on stage had been fed into systems designed to monitor and predict their influence. It was not just betrayal, it was violation. But they were not victims. They had made a choice to become the detonators of a truth too dangerous to be locked away. In the weeks following the leaks, chaos did not erupt in flames. Instead, it simmered in institutions. Government officials resigned quietly. CEOs vanished behind closed doors. Several intelligence programs were retired overnight, with press releases wrapped in euphemisms about modernization. But the people didn't forget. Protesters flooded the streets in Seoul, Los Angeles, Paris, Sao Paulo. The movement was no longer defined by fandom. It had become a collective demand for liberation from the unseen puppeteers who had made lives into algorithms. The Lilac movement, once a soft murmur in coded forums, now bloomed across the world as an unspoken understanding. Artists, activists, tech developers, and even former intelligence officers joined it. Seo-yeon published a public manifesto detailing the technical breakdown of Viridian Gate's manipulation systems. She never signed her name, but those who had met her knew her voice. Despite all this, no one could find Jungkook or Taehyung. For a time, people thought they had died. There were tributes, murals, impromptu candlelight concerts in cities where they had once performed. Entire subway cars in Tokyo were turned into moving shrines. But then, small things began to appear. A melody uploaded anonymously to an open-source music platform, unmistakably woven with Jungkook's signature falsetto. A photograph, grainy and poorly lit, showing someone who looked like Taehyung painting on the side of a wall in Havana, his face half covered by a scarf. They hadn't died. They had changed. And they had become watchers now, just like those who once watched them, but with a different purpose. In a remote coastal village in southern Portugal, hidden behind stone walls and overgrown vines, a house sat on the edge of a cliff. It faced the Atlantic, where waves crashed with the kind of rhythm that echoed forgotten songs. Inside, the furniture was minimal, the air thick with salt and the faint scent of jasmine tea. There was no internet, no phones, only handwritten journals, acoustic guitars, and silence. Jungkook stood barefoot on the porch, staring at the horizon. His hair had grown out darker again, curls blown gently by the ocean wind. His shoulders had lost the tension they once held, but his eyes were still sharp, watching the sea like it might carry some message from the world they left behind. Taehyung sat nearby, sketching in a leather-bound notebook. He had grown leaner, sun-browned. his fingers smudged with charcoal, the edges of his sketches capturing not people or events, but emotions, abstract shapes that bled between grief and peace. They had made a pact. No more names. No more cameras. Only observation and memory. They did not speak often, but when they did, the words mattered. Taehyung looked up from his drawing. "Do you miss it?" Jungkook didn't answer immediately. "Sometimes," he said, "but not the spotlight, not the noise, just the connection." "To the audience." "To the truth," Jungkook replied. "To something real before it was bent." Taehyung nodded. "They still sing your songs." "They're not mine anymore," Jungkook said. "They belong to whoever needs them now." The next day, a small boat arrived in the nearby harbor. No name, no engine sound, only a sail and a man with skin burned by years of sun. He delivered a sealed envelope. No return address. Just a symbol on the wax seal, the same triangle and green eye from Viridian Gate, but crossed through with a single red line. Jungkook opened it. Inside was a single photograph. A child, no more than 6 years old, standing in front of a burned building in Jakarta. The child held a tablet. On its cracked screen, paused in mid-frame, was the video Jungkook and Taehyung had leaked, their faces visible, speaking the truth to whoever would listen. The child's eyes stared into the camera, fierce and unbroken. There was no message. None was needed. Later that evening, Jungkook walked down to the beach alone. He stood ankle-deep in the surf, the stars sharp overhead, and he remembered every moment he had tried to forget. The training, the manipulation, the fans crying in front rows while he tried to smile through betrayal. He remembered his father's voice, warning him long before he understood the weight of legacy. The system had wanted to use him. Now he had burned the system. But something remained unfinished. The next morning, he woke Taehyung with a simple sentence. "It's time." Taehyung didn't ask where, he only nodded. They left that same day. Moving once again, through false identities and back routes, through Cairo's alleyways, through the bazaars of Istanbul, through hidden monasteries in Tibet. Along the way, they left pieces behind, not messages but acts. A flash drive with code slipped into a journalist's bag. A conversation overheard in a train station. A song sung anonymously on a rooftop in Mumbai. They became phantoms not of fear, but of defiance. And in their wake, a new generation rose. Artists who didn't sign with companies that tracked biometric data. Producers who created open-source tools for creative expression free of algorithmic curation. Governments were forced to be more transparent, not out of goodwill, but because the people had learned to look deeper. Viridian Gate didn't end in one explosion. It unraveled, string by string, because two voices, once groomed to entertain and control, had instead become mirrors. The world saw itself truly, and it could never unsee it. Years later, a child in Oslo would ask their mother, "Did Jungkook and Taehyung ever come back?" The mother, once a girl who stood at the edge of a concert crowd and screamed their names with tears in her eyes, would smile gently and say, "They never left." Because somewhere in the quiet corners of the earth, where oceans kiss the sky and no wires hum, two men still walked. And they remembered everything. The streets of Marrakesh whispered old stories through their winding alleys and sun-washed stones. In a forgotten quarter untouched by tourism, with walls the color of cinnamon and ochre, a door swung open to reveal a narrow passage cloaked in shadow. A boy darted past, chasing a fluttering scrap of paper in the wind, and behind him a figure stepped into the light, hooded, quiet, composed. Jungkook's gait had changed. He moved like smoke, now present, yet almost imperceptible. The years had taught him not only how to disappear, but how to observe the world without ever disturbing it. Taehyung followed, his stride slower, a soft leather satchel slung over his shoulder, a scarf around his neck despite the heat. They had come far from the shores of Portugal, not in search of refuge but purpose. They didn't run anymore. They followed threads, pieces of the machine that had not yet collapsed. What they had dismantled was only the first layer, and while the world had shifted, not all its architects had fallen. Inside a tea house with sanded wood panels and stained glass windows, they met a woman with eyes the color of molten brass. Her name was Zara, and she had once been a cyberpsychologist embedded deep within an unnamed agency that operated under the guise of humanitarian analysis. Now, she worked in secret to deprogram those who had unknowingly been weaponized: artists, musicians, influencers, all part of a larger system of digital behavior manipulation they hadn't consented to. "You dismantled Viridian Gate," Zara said, sipping mint tea, her accent clipped but gentle. "But not its roots. The roots spread deeper than you think. What you exposed was just the instrument, but the composition, the symphony it played, still echoes. It's being rewritten under new names, cloaked in softer language." Taehyung leaned forward. "Where?" Zara pushed a folder across the table. Inside were photos, graphs, and fragmented notes. No logos, no dates, just cold strategies. "There's a compound," she said, "hidden in the Sierra Nevada mountains, supposedly abandoned. But encrypted satellite data shows consistent heat signatures, power flux, and atmospheric interference, likely shielding. Not military, not government, something else, something private." Jungkook glanced at the images, then closed the folder. "Who's funding it?" "No one you'll find on any public registry, but all traces point back to a name buried in the files you leaked, obscured but not erased: Kestrel." The name hung in the air like a wound. Kestrel had appeared only once in the original Viridian Gate leaks, in a line of internal memos. No title, no location, just the word Kestrel, confirmed divergence protocol initiated. Seo-yeon had flagged it as a likely code name, but they hadn't been able to crack it. Now it had resurfaced. "Divergence protocol," Taehyung repeated under his breath, "as in Plan B." "As in," Zara said, lowering her voice, "when the first operation failed, when you broke the algorithm, they launched a separate timeline, a different strategy, less about control, more about replacement." "Replacement of what?" Jungkook asked. "Of culture," Zara replied. "Of influence, of voice. They're building personas, not people, digital figureheads indistinguishable from reality. They're calling them human emotive replicas, hers." "Hers," Taehyung echoed, then frowned. "Like female pronoun." Zara nodded. "Intentional maybe, maybe not. The first 3 prototypes are already active in trial zones, smaller platforms, controlled engagement. They look real. They sound real, but they aren't. They're synthetic conduits for calculated emotional resonance, built to feel more authentic than actual artists, without the unpredictability." "Artificial influence," Jungkook muttered. "It's not enough they tried to control real people. Now they're erasing them entirely. No controversies, no breakdowns, no deaths, just clean, perpetual charisma." Taehyung exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "And people do know." "Not yet," Zara said. "But when they do, it will already be too late. Hers are designed to evolve, to learn faster than any human artist. They can sing, write, interact, perform, and eventually they'll eclipse everything organic." Jungkook stood. "We're exactly in the Sierra Nevada." Zara met his gaze. "You're not planning to go alone." "We're not planning to go at all," Jungkook replied. "We're already going." The flight to California was layered in deception. They changed identities 3 times between transfers, landed not in LA but in a regional airfield outside of Fresno. From there, they disappeared into a rented Jeep with no GPS, no cell coverage, and a hard copy map. As the mountains rose in the distance, the air grew thinner, colder. Trees gave way to rock, and rock to snow-slick paths barely wide enough for their tires. There were no signs, no markers, only Zara's instructions and a hand-drawn path that led through uncharted land. At night, they camped in silence beneath a sky so clear it felt unreal. The stars felt closer here, like ancient witnesses. Taehyung sketched their outlines by firelight. Jungkook read through the fragments of Kestrel's operational notes Zara had smuggled to them. Words like neural rhythm capture, sentiment bleed, and empathic entanglement interface haunted the pages. They reached the compound on the fourth day. It was built into the side of a cliff, invisible from the sky. There were no fences, no guards, just an entrance cut into rock so seamless it disappeared in the shadows. They waited until twilight, then moved. Inside, the corridors were cold, metallic, silent. They passed through levels lit by soft blue light, the hum of unseen machines a constant pulse beneath their feet. There were no windows, just screens, dozens, maybe hundreds, each displaying faces. Women mostly, different ethnicities, smiling, singing, laughing, crying. Hers. Each one performing in front of fake audiences, repeating phrases, analyzing reactions in real time. Their voices adjusted mid-sentence, their posture recalibrated. Each mistake was corrected within milliseconds. At the far end of the facility, they found a room with no doors, just a circular chamber with a single chair and a headset suspended from the ceiling. Beside it was a terminal blinking. Welcome Jianjayunjikok. Input neural key 2 initiate. Jungkook stared at the screen. They used me to build it. Taehyung's breath caught in his throat. You think this is your brain pattern? My voice, my stage data, my emotional resonance. He stepped back. I thought I was being watched, but I was being copied. He turned to Taehyung. They didn't just want to control me, they wanted to replace me. The realization crashed down between them like thunder. Taehyung approached the terminal and pulled a drive from his pocket, Zara's virus, designed to overwrite the learning core and burn the base structure. It was dangerous. It could trigger lockdown protocols, but it would be irreversible. You sure? He asked. Jungkook nodded. Taehyung slid the drive into the port. Alarms erupted instantly. Red lights flared. Somewhere deeper in the compound, machinery began to shut down, doors sealed. Jungkook grabbed Taehyung's hand. This way. They ran through collapsing corridors, sparks raining from the ceilings, artificial voices stuttering as they lost coherence. Behind them, screens flickered, faces warped. Some hers smiled until their lips bled pixels, others screamed. By the time they reached the surface, smoke was pouring from the cliffside. A deep rumble echoed across the mountains as the core of the facility began to fail. They didn't stop running. Only once they were miles away, back at the jeep, did they collapse against the hood, lungs burning, hearts racing. Taehyung looked at Jungkook. We shut it down. For now, Jungkook said, but they'll try again. Taehyung nodded. Then we'll be ready. They didn't return to Portugal. Instead, they kept moving. No longer hunted, but hunting. Because somewhere, even now, someone was trying to build a voice louder than the truth. And it was their job to remind the world that silence, too, could be an act of rebellion, that authenticity could not be coded, that human hearts, no matter how fragile, were never obsolete. They vanished again, but never completely. Because every time a new star rose too quickly, too perfectly, too cleanly, the world would pause and remember the two who chose disappearance over obedience. The ones who had once sung not just to be heard, but to awaken. A thin fog hung over the outskirts of Prague as the first light of dawn spilled into the narrow cobblestone streets. In the older parts of the city, time moved differently. Here, memories clung to stone like moss, and secrets had a way of lingering long after their owners vanished. Under a slate-colored sky, two shadows moved deliberately through the morning hush, Jungkook and Taehyung, their footsteps muted, their breath misting the chilled air. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the Sierra Nevada facility, but silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was a language of its own. They had returned to Europe not because it was safe, it wasn't, but because it was necessary. The files Zara had decrypted before they burned the HER compound had revealed something deeper, a root that hadn't yet been touched. Kestrel wasn't just a node in the network. It was a node guardian. It had buried something in the oldest of systems, offline archives, cold storage vaults, analog protocols designed to outlive any hack or virus. These were held in places that governments had long since abandoned as obsolete. But Jungkook knew better. The deepest secrets were never kept on satellites or cloud servers. They were kept in rooms with no internet connection and no official designation. And Prague, with its ancient universities and forgotten catacombs beneath the city, held one of them. They reached the appointed address, a narrow antique bookstore tucked between two defunct tram lines. Its sign had faded to the point of invisibility, and its windows were cloudy with dust. Inside, the scent of old paper and wood polish filled the air. Books were stacked in precarious towers, creating labyrinthine paths through the store. A brass bell jingled as they entered, and from the shadows, a woman appeared. She was elderly, with silver hair pinned in a tight bun, and her presence was sharp, commanding without being threatening. Her name was Dr. Alina Novak, and according to Zara, she was one of the last custodians of analog archives connected to early psychological influence operations from before the digital age, projects that later evolved into the frameworks that birthed Viridian Gate. "You're late," she said flatly, turning her back as she gestured them to follow. Jungkook glanced at Taehyung and then stepped forward. They followed her down a narrow stairwell hidden behind a bookshelf. The walls grew colder, rougher, until they opened into a stone corridor lit by low-burning oil lamps. The modern world disappeared above them. Here, history was preserved in silence and dust. "I won't ask why you're here," Alina said as they walked. "I saw what you did to the HER program. Kestrel has gone dark. That alone speaks volumes." "We believe there's a deeper root," Jungkook said. "A parent program, older than Viridian, maybe even predating the internet. A behavioral script." She stopped in front of a rusted metal door, then turned, eyes narrowing. "You're looking for Mnemosyne." Taehyung frowned. "What is that?" "Not what, who," Alina replied. Mnemosyne was the project codename, the name of the Titan goddess of memory, a psychological conditioning program that predates digital surveillance. It used auditory and emotional resonance to embed beliefs in subjects through music, rhythm, repeated phrases. The prototype subjects were children. It was deemed unethical and terminated, or so they claimed. Jungkook's heart tightened. "My father mentioned Mnemosyne in one of his journals, but I thought it was a metaphor." "No," Alina said. "It was real. And if your father knew about it, he was already deeper than you imagined." She opened the door. Inside was a circular room lined with filing cabinets, analog reels, handwritten reports, cassette tapes marked with red dots. A reel-to-reel machine sat in the center, connected to an amplifier and a set of heavy headphones. Alina moved toward a file drawer, pulling a manila envelope with their father's name on it, Jeon Myung-sik. Jungkook reached for it slowly, hands shaking. Inside were transcripts, handwritten notes of therapy sessions, data logs of cognitive behavior changes, even musical notations. At the bottom was a cassette labeled, Subject JS Code, Orpheus. He inserted it into the machine and slipped on the headphones. What he heard was his own voice. Not present day, but as a child, singing, repeating phrases over and over. And then another voice, his father's soft, encouraging. "What do you hear, Jungkook?" A pause. "I hear the colors, Appa." "What do the colors say?" "They say I have to sing them. They said they'll go away if I stop." Jungkook pulled the headphones off, heart pounding. "They used me," he whispered. "My father tried to protect me by building a safe structure around it. He disguised the effects through performance training, but they recorded every reaction. My whole career wasn't just watched, it was engineered." Taehyung stepped closer, voice hushed. That means you weren't just a target, you were the blueprint. Alina nodded. And Taehyung, you were likely selected as an anchor, a stabilizer. They always paired core subjects with emotional regulators. Your bond wasn't just friendship, it was reinforcement. The world spun sideways for a moment. Taehyung sat down, his hand gripping the table. That's why I always felt like I could feel what he was feeling, like I had to. The tapes kept playing in the background, humming with distorted melodies and childhood laughter. Jungkook looked around the room and saw the fragments of other subjects, some terminated, some integrated. They weren't alone. There had been others. Perhaps some were still out there, unaware of what they were. We need to burn this, Jungkook said, voice steel. All of it. Alina nodded. I already have a plan. That night they carried as much as they could from the archives to a field outside the city, where Alina had prepared a pyre. The documents, the tapes, the files, all of it. Taehyung lit the first match. The fire took quickly, roaring into the night sky like a cleansing storm. But before she let it burn, Alina handed Jungkook one final envelope, sealed in wax, older than all the others. Your father left this with me before he disappeared, said you'd come one day. Jungkook opened it alone under the stars. Inside was a photograph of a young Jungkook, barely 5 years old, sitting on his father's lap in a music studio. They were both smiling. On the back, in faded ink, were the words, "You are not the sum of what they made you. You are the song that broke their silence." He sat there for a long time, the photo clutched in his hand, the fire crackling behind him. In the weeks that followed, they traveled once more, not to disappear but to seek. They found others like them, survivors of influence, victims of invisible puppeteers. Together they began to rebuild not just lives but art, real, unfiltered, imperfect creation. Street musicians who played from memory instead of charts, painters who refused algorithms, poets who had never touched a trending tag. They released music under no name, videos with no faces, only emotion. And the world responded. Slowly, a counter-movement began, not another revolution of noise, but of resonance, a return to feeling instead of feeding, connection instead of consumption. And in the shadows, the system still churned. But they were losing control. Because the two they had tried to replicate, to manipulate, to erase, had become something they couldn't predict. They had become free. And in doing so, they had reminded the world what it meant to be human. Snow had started falling gently over the rooftops of Talon when Jungkook and Taehyung arrived, their footsteps muffled by the fresh layer of white. The air was still, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Christmas lights flickered faintly in shop windows, but the streets were nearly empty, a stillness cloaked in something deeper than weather, an atmosphere of pause, of contemplation, like the world had slowed to listen. They checked into a nondescript inn run by an old woman who spoke no English and only pointed toward the key hanging on a brass hook. Their room was small, with worn wooden floors and a single window overlooking the square. The radiator hissed softly, and the silence felt sacred. Taehyung removed his scarf slowly and stood at the window, watching snowflakes catch the light as they tumbled past the glass. "Do you think it'll ever be quiet?" he asked softly, not turning around. Jungkook sat on the edge of the bed, his hands resting on his knees. "It is quiet now." "I don't mean around us," Taehyung said. "I mean inside." Jungkook didn't answer for a while. He stared down at his palms, tracing invisible scars. So much had changed. They had peeled back layers of global deception, destroyed an empire of artificial emotion, and burned the traces of childhood experiments designed to engineer gods out of boys. Yet something still buzzed under the surface of his thoughts, like static that refused to fade. "I don't think the quiet ever stays," he said finally. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe the noise is part of living, and we just have to decide which voices are worth listening to." Taehyung gave a small, tired smile. "You sound like him." "My father." Taehyung nodded. Jungkook tilted his head back and let the ceiling fan spin slowly above him. I used to wonder what would have happened if I'd never picked up that phone in Dubai. If we just smiled through the interview, boarded our flight and gone back to our old lives. We would have kept singing songs written by other people, Taehyung said, living moments measured in metrics, thinking we were free while dancing in a cage. Jungkook looked at him, and would that have been easier? Yes, Taehyung said without hesitation, easier but hollow. There was a knock at the door, once, then silence. Jungkook stood slowly, crossing the room to peer through the peephole. A young man stood in the hallway, no older than 20, bundled in layers of mismatched coats. His eyes were bright, nervous. In his gloved hands he held a small brown package. Jungkook opened the door. "For you," the young man said in heavily accented English, holding out the package with both hands like an offering. Jungkook accepted it. "Who sent this?" But the boy only shook his head and turned, disappearing down the hallway and out the stairwell before they could stop him. Inside the package was a single cassette tape and a handwritten note. "From Archive Subject 17, I remember you. I remember everything." Taehyung stared at the tape, his expression unreadable. "Another survivor?" he asked. "Or a warning?" Jungkook replied. There was no player in the room, but the innkeeper brought them an old portable radio from her attic after a clumsy explanation and a few scribbled drawings. They inserted the cassette and pressed play. The tape crackled, then a voice began to sing. A girl's voice, young, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The song was simple, childlike, a lullaby. But the melody was familiar. Taehyung's hand gripped the edge of the table. That's the same scale structure used in Mnemosyne conditioning, same intervals. Jungkook felt something twist in his chest. The girl sang 3 verses, each ending with the same line. "When the mirror breaks, you see what's left behind." Then the voice changed. It wasn't the girl anymore. It was Jungkook's voice, distorted by age and technology, lifted from another time. "I saw you through the glass. You were drawing stars. I was crying, but you said we were flying." Taehyung sat down slowly. "This is from the observation room, when we were still kids." "We weren't supposed to remember," Jungkook said, "but some part of us did." The tape ended abruptly. No click, no rewind, just silence. Taehyung stared at the window. If Subject 17 remembers, she might still be out there. She might have the missing pieces. Jungkook stood, "Then we find her." They followed the trail through handwritten addresses and encoded files left in the drive Alina had given them. Each city brought them closer. In Amsterdam, they found a woman named Sabine, a former technician who had worked on the memory suppression algorithms. She was dying, cancer, advanced stage, but she remembered enough to draw a map. In Berlin, they found a school that wasn't a school, just a facade for a rehabilitation center where child subjects were reconditioned before reintegration into society. It was empty now, shuttered, but the basement was filled with chalk drawings and old recordings. In Warsaw, they found Subject 17. Her name was Mia. She lived in a quiet part of the city under a different name, teaching violin to local children, her past buried under layers of forged identities and faded memories. But when she saw Jungkook and Taehyung, she didn't flinch. She only whispered, "You came back." Mia was in her late 20s now, and her memory had gaps. Years of conditioning couldn't be undone fully. But she had kept one thing, music. She played for them that night, a piece she said had haunted her dreams since childhood. It began as a soft lullaby, then shifted into something deeper, more complex, part mourning, part defiance. After she played, she turned to Jungkook. "They called you the spark," she said. "You were the only one who could break the loop." Jungkook shook his head. "I didn't break it, we did." She smiled faintly. "Then you have to keep going." In the weeks that followed, the 3 of them began working together. Not to fight, There were no more facilities left to burn but to remember. They gathered stories from others like them, those who had survived, those who had forgotten and begun to remember. Each story became a note, each note a thread in a greater song. And slowly, the world began to hear again. They created a symphony not of melodies but of memory, a global project that invited people to contribute forgotten sounds, lost lyrics humming phrases that had lived in the back of their minds for years. It was called the Echo Room, an online platform with no usernames, no algorithms, just sound, raw, unfiltered. The Echo Room became a sanctuary. People logged in not to consume, but to feel. And amidst the sea of anonymous uploads, some began to notice familiar themes. A whisper of a tune once sung by a boy with stars in his eyes. A harmony carried across the Atlantic by two silhouettes who had once set the world ablaze with their music. Jungkook and Taehyung never signed their names. They didn't need to. Their voices had become something more than identity. They had become reminders that even in a world rebuilt on silence and control, truth always found its way through the cracks, like light through broken glass. And somewhere in a small inn in Tallinn or a tea shop in Marrakesh or beneath the stars in Lisbon, two travelers still wandered, not to escape, not to hide, but to listen, to gather, to remember. Because memory, they had learned, was the final rebellion, and it could never be erased.